Hey everyone, it's J Funk again. Today, here to talk to you today about the BfA Seasonal Affix, as the expansion is drawing to a close pretty soon, and we've had the time to play through each of these affixes and collect our thoughts about these affixes. I think it's time we talk about what they did wrong and what they did right. Mostly what they did wrong, but somewhat what they did right. Even the worst affixes, such as Infested and Beguiling, still brought things to the table that I think were interesting and cool. But without further ado, let's get into it real quick. The first one is Infested. Now, Infested was the first seasonal affix. It was in season 1. It was a very flavorful affix. I liked that the Cahoon had infested the dungeon. It was a cool idea. But I didn't like how punishing it was. Infested was very punishing. It had a really steep learning curve. Not only how to deal with the mobs themselves, but also when you add on the fact that there was a seasonal rotation and you had to learn the placements of each mob, it became incredibly difficult, incredibly hard to learn which week it was and like what you could pull and what you couldn't pull, which made it a lot harder to deal with than it really should have been. But overall, towards the end of the season, in season 1, this affix just became very uninteractive. Ended up just very unfun. Because what you did, you mostly just avoided the infested mobs if you could. You would just CC the infested mobs if you could, and then you would just pull, you would do your pull, and then you would just pull the infested mobs together, and then you would just kill the infested mobs together. That was pretty much it. It was kind of uninteractive and not very fun at the end. But you still needed to know the routing and create routes in order to actually effectively do Infested. Otherwise, it didn't really work. Overall, I think it was a good first try, but it mainly just served like other affixes to slow the dungeon down, and it didn't really make them more fun. Now, speaking of fun, we're moving on to Reaping. Now, Reaping, Season 2 Reaping was an incredibly fun affix. I think when I think of seasonal affixes that I like, just like the flavorful, well-polished, and fun experiences, the classic Blizzard experiences, I think of Reaping. Now, Reaping wasn't the deepest affix. It was very simple. You kill the mobs in the dungeon, and then at certain points in the dungeon, when you reach 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100% enemy forces count, the mobs that you killed before will respawn and run at you. And they'll be ghosts, and they have these unique abilities, and then it just becomes very frantic, and it has these moments of huge AoE, very fun, exciting. Everyone loves doing big AoE damage. Everyone loves that. I think that was really just shown well in Reaping and why it's so well received. Now, it wasn't the hardest affix. I think out of all the affixes, this expansion, it was the easiest affix. But I think it was also the most well received just because it was so easy. It was easy and it was fun to deal with. It just felt like a step forward in seasonal affixes. Like, this is what they could be if Blizzard really just put their all into seasonal affixes, and that was great. This is also was the first seasonal affix that was used in the MDI, so that maybe that'd be one of the reasons why they took their time and actually made this affix very fun and very polished. Features include like having Bonsomdi appear at the entrance to the dungeon, and if you deplete your key, you can talk to him, get a buff. That was really cool, really interesting. But this affix didn't have all positive. It was buggy. It did have some bugs with it when it first released, such as Lost Souls. Lost Souls, their Shadow Smash was telegraphed in front of them, but it wouldn't always hit in front of them. It would hit wherever they turned or wherever their model was facing. It took Blizzard a while to fix it. Once they did, it was great. It was a fantastic affix. It was a bit buggy in Toldegor, but let's be real, what isn't buggy in Toldegor? Speaking of buggy, we're moving on to Season 3's affix, Beguiling. Now, Beguiling, I think, is universally the least liked affix. It is the most polarizing, or you could say the most hated affix, this expansion. Mainly just because of how unpolished it was. It felt like a step backwards from Reaping. Reaping, we had this incredibly fun, simple affix, and we go to Beguiling, and it's just they just throw all these emissaries at you that do all these different things that you're supposed to figure out what they do. It brought back the seasonal rotation, but now the seasonal rotation is even more important than ever, because now you have the emissaries that are in the dungeon, like the majority of the emissaries, the type of them is dependent on the week that you're pushing, which created these problems where you'd have weeks that are usually good push weeks, but then it's all of a sudden it's a void week, instead of being an enchanted week, and you're like, oh no, we can't push this week because it's void. That's very, very bad. I think seasonal rotations probably should go away, or at least if they're gonna have seasonal rotations for seasonal affixes, it shouldn't be nearly as impactful as they are, right? It should be like, oh, I think Awaken did a good job at that, where it's this obelisk instead of this one this week, but it doesn't really matter that much because the obelisks are still in the same place. Very reliable there. But with beguiling, also, it wasn't very polished. One of the things is that from season 2 to season 3, there was an interview with Ian Hatzikosis, the director of World of Warcraft, and he said he had a comment on reaping, and he said that reaping was just a little bit too easy. They didn't like how it was too easy for players. And I have to disagree with Mr. Ian. I think reaping was like the perfect seasonal affixes because maybe it was easy, but it was also just very fun, and it didn't really need to be complex. I don't think seasonal affixes need to be complex. Like beguiling. I think beguiling was a failed experiment. It also, beguiling, I think, was intended to be more than what it was. I don't think the developers actually had time to finish working on beguiling. There was supposed to be these buffs that you gained from killing the beguiling mobs that was data mined back in season 3, but they weren't in the game when it released. Additionally, they had to nerf beguiling quite a bit in order to make it actually not just awful. They nerfed it multiple times over the course of its existence. It was very, very difficult. Definitely too difficult. They missed their mark there. I think beguiling as a whole was just kind of a bad mark on affixes, seasonal affixes. It left a sour taste in people's mouths. I don't think that really we could learn much from beguiling other than having a seasonal affix be too difficult and too impactful kind of sucks the fun out of the game for most people. And that it really isn't fun. I think a seasonal affix should make the game more fun, not make it less fun. So in any case, we're moving on to Awakened. Now, Awakened is the last seasonal affix of BfA, and I think Awakened is a really good seasonal affix. Let me skip forward here in the video to show them off a little bit. But it's just a really good affix. It's really well thought out. It isn't super fun, but even at a lower level, it can be even like at a high level or a lower level, Awaken is just fun to deal with. Or it's interesting to deal with, because if at a lower level, if you're just pugging keys, like say you do a King's Rest, it allows you to skip all this trash that you normally needed a rogue for before. Now you don't need a rogue anymore. You can just take whoever and whatever class and just do the obelisk and just skip all that stuff. That's really nice, really handy. Very interesting. But I wouldn't say it's fun. Like, you don't get excited or fun. You don't get excited when you enter an obelisk. You're like, oh man, I can't wait to kill this obelisk guardian. Let's do it, dude. This is gonna be great. Like reaping. Reaping, we were excited when reaping happened. But I do respect and like how well thought out it is in terms of it's a challenge. If you want to, you can do obelisk with the last boss, and it's an opt-in challenge. That's great. And it makes certain dungeons, you pull them a little bit differently this season than you had before, because you have all these other extra skips that you can do, and it opens up comps a bit in terms of you don't necessarily need a rogue in your group to do some of these dungeons like King's Rest. You don't need a rogue in your group. You can get away without having one. That's great. I like it. I think overall Awakened is like a very solid affix. But I think going forward next season, I think the lessons we learn is that you want a seasonal rotation can be good. A seasonal rotation can be all right, but they can't be too impactful. Additionally, I think that the difficulty of seasonal affixes needs to be carefully monitored, because if the difficulty is too high, like beguiling, it just kind of sucks the fun out of the game for a lot of people, and they don't really want to play the game and be oppressed by another affix, because you already have these 3 other affixes that are just pushing you down and making you do the dungeon slower. And it's really felt what beguiling felt like. It just felt like it was there for you to do the dungeon slower. And I don't think people like that. I like having an affix that maybe is a challenge, but if I do it correctly, I can do the dungeon faster than I ever have. But that's it for me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.